Hey everyone, this is a clip from a recent episode of the Men of Steel podcast where we talk about Superman and Superman adjacent topics. If you enjoy this clip, check out the podcast. You can find it at certainpov.com or wherever you get your shows. Here's the first question to the table. Who read it when it came out versus who read it after the fact? We'll start with J-Mike.
I was totally after the fact because I saw the movie first. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I was like, oh wait, there's a whole series that goes with it too. And I was like, oh, I'll get to that later. The movie was more fun. And then I read it and I was like, oh wow, we left out a lot. This is way more than I thought it was going to be. But it was still awesome.
June, how about you?
I read this when it initially came out, issue by issue. I was in college at the time. And I gleefully remember reading this during those classes where like, I've got a 3-hour lecture on Puritan literature. No, I'm good. Give me that. This is more colorful. It might be the best comic book I've ever read. I don't know. I read it when it came out, and I've read it since. I usually read it once every couple of years because it rewards every time you come back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like every panel is so rich. There's so much going on in all of it. Alan, I almost feel like it's redundant to ask you if you read this as it was coming out or not.
Sure.
But I'm going to, just, for format.
Yeah. No, I absolutely read it as it came out. It was glorious. I would like get my issues, then buy a couple of copies just to be able to lend them out to people. Yeah, I also regularly reread this. It's one of those where sometimes I'll go back and there's just some scene or something and I think like, I want to check that. How did he word that again? How did Clark word that? And I just want to reread that scene or that issue, but then it just keeps me back as, I should probably reread this from the beginning. Like we're just gonna sit down and reread the entire thing from scratch. Okay, cool. It's just one of those things. There are a couple of things that didn't work for me when I first read it, and that still don't work for me as well. But the whole overall product, I just think is masterful, and it's such a timeless Superman story and such a great feel that doesn't necessarily belong to one set of canon or the other. So it's just, there's so much about that holds up. And you're right, the art is so masterfully done and so pitch perfect for the tone. You immediately know what kind of world you're in with this story. So yeah.
Yeah, certainly heavy hitter team putting this out between Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Morrison gets a lot of the attention just because writers tend to get a lot of focus in terms of conversation about like who created this story. But Quitely's art on this is just so detailed at so many spots. There's a conversation that people have about Frank Quitely art where like the faces, like not everyone's like immediately there for it. But I've always enjoyed his Superman, and the details of the world that the characters operate in are always so rich. It's just great to like actually just see, and it's awesome to come and revisit this now because it's been a couple years for me.
I think this is my first time actually like reading it all the way through. I think I've read an episode here or there, but never gone from cover to cover for the full thing.
Oh really?
Yeah. I'm a bad Superman fan, I admit.
We've all said that about you.
Shame me for eternity. I am sorry.
The interesting thing that strikes me about rereading it now or rereading it in trade versus when it came out was when it came out, I remember it gave me a similar feeling to The Long Halloween, the Batman story arc, in that it felt a bit like a story told in real time. It felt as you were reading month to month that perhaps a month had passed for Superman as well in this story. And indeed, in between two of the issues, it really seems to actually outright say that it's been a few weeks since we last saw him on this other adventure. And that was an interesting experience that didn't normally happen in superhero comics, where everything's on such a sliding time scale, and it'll take 3 months to present a story that takes place in the span of 3 hours sometimes. So I remember that was another unique thing where each issue felt as a chapter of a greater story, but also had its own episodic nature to it, and had a beginning, middle, end to what was happening.
I think it's a very novelistic work. One thing that really struck me on this reread is how similarly the themes and the language play out. talking about the human body, talking about death as a slow process of rot, talking about all these Superman analogs trying to self-actualize. That exact phrase is used multiple times in the book. So it really strikes me that like it is, I think it's accurate to describe this as episodic when it was coming out, and I wouldn't have picked up any of these things, I think, on an individual issue level. But it does really come together, despite having that really clear 3-act structure that is pointed out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's so typical of a lot of Morrison work in general, isn't it? Where you know, you go back to JLA, which they were writing back in the 90s, and there are little tidbits just dropped in issue 6 or 7 that 20 issues later you're like, oh, that's a person, and that's a thing that's coming. Oh God. Even just a remark by Metron like turns out to have great significance 11 years later in a different comic. Morrison's always been so wonderful at looking at things as the whole, in different interviews, and we talked about this one time when I was hosting a Q&A for them. Morrison spoke of 4D vision, looking at things and just imagining the entire journey across the timeline that thing's taken. If you're looking at a chair, then just the tree it came from and what it'll be like later when it's rotten or ash. And I feel that informs their view of storytelling. They really are, even if they haven't planned it all, and I do think Morrison is more of a pantser than maybe they'll ever admit when it comes to storytelling, but they've got the beats and they know how to bring in those themes and those phrases that you mentioned, the language of what's our journey, what are we striving for, and to keep threading them through so that it really does feel, even if you're enjoying 5 episodes, it's like, oh, these are 5 great stories, these are 5 great chapters, that when you then reread it all at once, it doesn't diminish anything. It actually comes together in a much fuller way and you see it as a saga.
Yeah, like rereading it this time. So last year I ended up going through and reading all of JLA and then all of DC 1 Million. And while there are obvious connections already, we see, the future version of Superman Prime in this. We have Solaris, but there are so many references in DC 1 Million that could pay off here, and it's kind of a throwaway thing because it's all time travel, and it's just here's fun, crazy ideas with the Superman squad that we can sort of set up is like out there for it all. But the fact that regardless of if it was fully planned or if it was just, I know I'm going to come back to this at some point, and so I'm going to put some seeds in here and see if it grows into a tree. It's wonderful seeing this DC career and seeing so much of it culminate in this work. Remember, if you like the clip, after you're done liking and subscribing, check out certainpov.com, where you can find more episodes of the show, as well as a ton of other great shows.